Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Francis Collins, Director of the NIH. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to this afternoon's lecture. This is the Robert S. Gordon, Jr. Lecture in Epidemiology, one of the specially named lectures that occurs as part of our Wednesday afternoon series. I'd like to express a specific welcome to students from American University that have joined us today. Thank you all for being here. We're delighted to have you in our midst. And also welcome to people who are watching by video. I know what we see here in the auditorium is only a fraction of those who are going to be listening to Professor Kuller's presentation. Let me just say a word about Robert S. Gordon, Jr., for whom this lecture is named, and there's information about this in your program. This lecture is presented annually to a scientist who has made major contributions to research or training in the field of epidemiology, or in the conduct of clinical trials. And the recipient is selected based on the advice and recommendation of senior epidemiologists here at NIH. This is the 18th year this award has been given, and if you look in your program, you will see the distinguished lineup of previous presenters of the Gordon Lecture. Robert Gordon was someone who devoted more than 30 years of exceptional service to the NIH, serving in numerous senior leadership positions, including special assistant to the NIH director. He was somebody with extensive knowledge and experience in the clinical sciences, and led him to become a chief advisor for clinical practice and research for two NIH directors. He was also an early organizer of efforts to address the emerging problem of HIV/AIDS, and became a key coordinator at NIH for AIDS research. He also made important contributions to inter-institute policy and management issues regarding epidemiology, clinical trials, and the health effects of environmental hazards. And so each year we recognize those contributions by this special lecture. This year's recipient of the Gordon Lecture Award is Dr. Louis Kuller. And we're fortunate indeed that he is here with us to give this presentation on the obesity epidemic, Why Have We Failed? Dr. Kuller is the Distinguished University Professor of Public Health at the University of Pittsburgh, obtained his MD at George Washington University here in DC, and then the Master's and Doctor of Public Health at Johns Hopkins. He was for a time on the faculty simultaneously, as far as I can tell, of both Hopkins and the University of Maryland, but then moved to the University of Pittsburgh, where he has been for most of his senior career as professor and chair of Department of Epidemiology in the Graduate School of Public Health, and then more recently as distinguished university professor. He has done much to serve the NIH. Thank you very much, Louis, in terms of many different panels that he has served on, and councils, for instance, to the National Institute on Aging, and has made substantial contributions across the field of epidemiology, including the area that he is going to talk about today. And it could hardly be more timely to have a focus today on the problem of obesity. We have recently seen predictions that this may be the first generation where children who are born today will live less long than their parents or their grandparents because of the toll that the epidemic of obesity is taking and will take upon our population if we do not figure out how to rein it in. There's lots of interest in doing something to bring this to public attention, efforts like the First Lady's effort called Let's Move. If you've already seen some of the promotions about the HBO special that is coming forward with 4-hour-long sessions describing the causes and the potential interventions for the obesity epidemic, you will be, I think, interested in seeing how that plays out, because much of it is based upon data generated by NIH research. So we have research, but we haven't actually figured out how to turn this around. Perhaps we will hear something today from Dr. Kuller about what we might do to try to do something to turn the tide in what otherwise is one of the greatest threats to the public health of our nation. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Louis Kuller, this year's Gordon Lecture.
Thank you very much, Dr. Collins, and thank you all for coming to this lecture. It's quite nice to see so many people interested in the topic. I'm an epidemiologist, and as you know, epidemiologists have to talk with slides. The slides are not that relevant in terms of the importance of the subject, but they help me keep track of what I'm talking about and help you a little bit in trying to understand the key words that I'll be saying today. And I hope I will make it possible for most of you to understand what I'm saying, including myself. This is, as pointed out, a very important topic, and if I leave you with one message, I would say it's the fact that in all of these epidemics that we have, the chronic disease epidemics, much like Dr. Gordon really stressed, it's important to use good, solid epidemiological methodology to try and understand the epidemic and then apply preventive techniques. Epidemiology is really the basic science of preventive medicine, and it's really not a very exciting field unless you use it to apply to the approach to preventive medicine. So with that, I'll start, and hopefully you'll understand it. Obesity is defined as excess body fat and has become increasingly prevalent during the past 30 years in the United States and the rest of the world. Obesity is associated with excess morbidity and mortality, especially cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and cancer. We have failed to control this obesity epidemic in the United States. Obesity is now becoming endemic, especially in lower socioeconomic classes. In 2009, 36% of U.S. adults were obese and 17% of children. Obesity as a medical problem first appeared in the English upper social class in the 18th and 19th century. The ability to store fat was probably a protection against famine. Many diseases of the past centuries were associated with low body weight and height, such as tuberculosis and other infectious diseases. There was a prevailing belief that excess caloric intake, especially high fat and protein diets, would protect against these diseases. In the 1950s and early 1960s, a major epidemic of amphetamine use, a stimulant, occurred for the treatment of overweight and obesity among upper social class women in the United States, primarily for a cosmetic effect. It was heavily supported by the drug industry and by many physicians. In 1967, 8 billion doses of amphetamines were produced, accounting for 5% of all prescriptions in the United States. By 1970, the hazards of the effects of amphetamines and the realization that they had little effect on any long-term weight loss led to their strict regulation. Body fat, as you know, distribution varies by age, sex, and ethnicity. Women have a higher percentage of body fat than men at any level of body size, approximately 28% of fat for women versus 15% for men. The percentage of body fat increases with age for both men and women. Non-Hispanic black women have less percentage of body fat than white women at similar levels of body size. Let's look at the obesity epidemic in relationship to traditional epidemiology of time, place, and person. As you know, there's been a dramatic increase in the prevalence of obesity among both men and women. This slide is just for women, showing from 1960 to 62 to 1999, 2008, almost a 2.5-fold increase. There is no evidence that we have changed the slope of the epidemic. Rather, as most recent data from the Center for Disease Control shows, the evidence suggests that the epidemic is persistent and has now perhaps become, as I suggested, endemic in the population. Obesity, most important, has become epidemic and persistent among young people. This shows the continued high rates of obesity from 1999 to 2010, recently reported data for children, and really shows no major impact of everything we've done so far on the obesity epidemic. Obesity has now become a socioeconomic disorder with more marked differences for women than for men in levels of obesity by educational levels. And if you can see here quite clearly the dramatic difference between the four-year degree with only 24% versus 36% for those, versus 41% for those less than a high school education. And that's an important thing to recognize, and also for severe obesity. Obesity prevalence is also much higher for non-Hispanic blacks. Again, noting here. This is especially true for class 3 obesity with BMIs over 40. This data suggests that it might be possible to modify the obesity epidemic by understanding the determinants of the differences in obesity by educational levels and socioeconomic status. However, the prevalence of obesity is 25% among college-educated, and much higher than in some other countries or in the past. An obesity prevalence of 25% may be a reasonable goal in the United States without a famine. Obesity is an example of a common source epidemic. The common source is excess energy intake and decreased energy expenditure. Unfortunately, it is difficult to measure intake from dietary surveys or expenditure from resting metabolic rate and exercise. There is a very poor correlation between estimated energy intake based on diet surveys and objective measures of energy intake, such as using double-label water. We can measure physical activity by a variety of different techniques, including questionnaires and more recently accelerometry, but it's difficult to connect the caloric expenditure based on the amount of exercise accurately in population studies because of the need to include measures of body size, muscle mass, and efficiency. The control of the obesity epidemic requires a better understanding of the epidemiology and pathophysiology of obesity. Certain factors are extremely important. First, and I think this is a message that was given by the first director of the National Heart Institute, and those of us in epidemiology, especially from the era of Hopkins, have carried it forward forever. It is basically impossible to control any disease successfully except by prevention. Second, understanding the determinants of the epidemiology of disease are critical: the host, the agent, and the environmental interaction. Third, epidemics of chronic diseases such as obesity are due to changes in behavior, that is, the host, the interaction of new agents and technology, and the changes in the social and physical environment that support the expansion and development of the epidemic in a genetically susceptible population. Fourth, over time, humans are destined to become heavier given an available supply of food and decreased level of energy expenditure. The development of the modern obesity epidemic includes the following. First, there has been an introduction of new and expanded behavioral lifestyles into the environment. The most powerful factor has probably been the change in family structure. Most of our current epidemics begin in the upper social class, in the better education. Next, populations become exposed to a new agent, often associated with new technology. For example, the cigarette smoking epidemic was primarily due to the development of techniques for manufacturing cigarettes and matchbooks at the turn of the 20th century. The development of technology to mass-produce fast foods, for example, the work of Kroc and later the McDonald's company, which he ran, and others have played a key role in the obesity epidemic. Once a new technology or an agent is introduced into the population, economic advantages and mass marketing, i.e. a niche, will determine the success of the spread of the agent. Food, for example, became a major replacement for adverse behaviors, such as cigarette smoking and alcohol, both of which have declined dramatically over the past 20 or 30 years. Over time, food has become our #1 social behavior. Eating for most people is not a therapeutic challenge, in spite of the view of many of my public health colleagues. The new behavior or lifestyles, agents, quickly spreads, especially to the lower socioeconomic class and less educated. For example, widespread availability of fast food chains, snack foods, and cheap calorically dense food. The continued expansion of the epidemic is a function of the cost, advertising, apparent psychological benefit, and as I pointed out, replacement for other adverse behaviors. There is a very important pathophysiological component. That is, an apparent lack of appetite suppression for many in the population. If, for example, we had very strong appetite suppression, then it is likely that the obesity epidemic would be less rampant. Recognition of the adverse effects of the obesity is first recognized in the better educated. This is similar to what happened with the cigarette smoking epidemic. There is a very sharp reversal of the socioeconomic distribution of disease. The adverse behavior becomes stigmatized. Obesity, especially for women, limits social acceptance and job opportunities. This is interesting, I think, and important. The adverse behavior then becomes a disease or an addiction, a genetic disorder, or a unique metabolic abnormality. So you can see, if you can, I hope, that what happens to the epidemic, and this is exactly what happens in every epidemic that we go through like this, it changes and suddenly it becomes a disease, and we have new behavioral interventions, medical therapy, study of pathophysiology. But at the bottom line, we have no clinical trials that reverse mortality. We still don't know why people eat too much or don't exercise. Then we have medical therapies, drugs and surgery. We have no drug for therapy for obesity. And we have 200,000 bariatric surgical procedures per year, which, as we'll see, is the most successful therapy. And then we have a variety of very good therapies for people who are fat but don't change the degree of obesity. The origins of the obesity epidemic, unfortunately, are often submerged by a focus on pathophysiology and descriptive epidemiology. There is a national public health response, often based on limited evidence of the value of specific interventions. The immediate need to do something to stop the epidemic has a high priority. Unfortunately, it may take years of trial and error to develop a good public health strategy because of limited understandings of the determinants of the epidemic. Often the determinants of the epidemic are politically unacceptable, i.e., that both parents or single parents are employed out of the home. Numerous committees, organizations, and society issue voluminous reports on solutions to the epidemic. Possibly some of these reports could serve as appetite suppressants. The simple rule is, if you don't know what to do, organize committees, workshops, and spread the problem. Now look at some of the more detailed aspects of the determinants of weight gain. The amount of kcals eaten, food consumption, and energy expenditure, primarily from exercise, are the key variables. The major determinant of dietary energy expenditure is fat-free body mass. The correlation between 24-hour resting metabolic rate and fat-free mass is about 0.8. The other components of dietary energy expenditure are the thermic effects of food intake and physical activity. There's a very high correlation between fat-free mass and BMI. In controlled experiments, this is a beautiful study from the Pennington Group in Louisiana recently by George Bray. Controlled experiments, energy intake is linearly related with change in body fat and change in lean body mass. Individuals gain weight because they eat more calories. Fat people do not eat less calories, in spite of what some people think. There was a dramatic increase over time in caloric intake per day, even after adjustment for food supply and waste. The average reported kcals in the American diet has increased over time, consistent with the estimated weight gain in the United States population. The United States Department of Agriculture reports that the estimated daily consumption of kcals in the year 2000 was about 12% greater than in 1985, about 300 kcals a day extra. The increase in kcal was due to more refined grain consumption, 46%, fat 24%, sugar 23%, from 1970 to 1985. Non-obese adult adults ingest about 900,000 kcals per year. A pound of adipose tissue is about 3,500 kcals. An average 20-pound weight gain over the age of 20 to 55 represents only a very small daily variation of ingested calories, certainly not measurable by any of our standard techniques. The modest small differences between energy intake and expenditure over time can result in a very major increase in body weight. For example, a woman aged 50 to 59 gains about 35 pounds over 28 years, about 1.5 pounds a year, or an extra 50 to 75 kcals per day. In order to maintain this excess weight, the caloric intake would have to increase by about 370 calories per day. Caloric intake is a function of body size and energy expenditure. A high caloric intake must be maintained after gaining weight to maintain the high BMI. Resting metabolic rate may vary among individuals at similar BMI or even lean body mass, possibly related to the type of fat distribution, such as brown versus white fat, and the energy required in food absorption and metabolism. A big problem in reverse is the overweight, obese man or woman who tries to lose weight. A 10% weight loss would require a constant decrease of 175 to 250 kcals per day, and a 20% about 325 to 430 kcals per day. First, as a woman, let's say, loses weight, both fat and non-fat tissues will be lost as well as water. A 3,500 kcal reduction in diet over a week, 500 calories per day, would cause about a 1 pound weight reduction in fat per week. Following weight loss, however, the resting metabolic rate and the energy cost of physical activity will decrease, and the weight loss will plateau without further decreases in kcal. This is a major problem in weight loss programs. As individuals begin to lose weight and suddenly plateau, without further decreases in kcal or increase in physical activity, they likely begin to regain weight as they slowly increase their caloric consumption. The second big factor is energy expenditure. We are the victims of the successes of previous generations in developing new technologies that greatly reduced energy expenditure at work and in the home. This is a study from 1800 from Great Britain, and it shows that in the highest intake group, the highest BMI of 26, the kcal consumption is about over 5,000 calories. And this is because, as we'll see, their activity. This is because of very high levels of physical activity on the work. Interesting, on the average, these individuals were short. The highest decile of the lowest decile of the BMI, 26, was associated with about a 5'11" man. But the middle range is only about 5'4" to 5'5". There was a very strong inverse relationship between height and mortality. The shorter and thinner individuals died at an early age. The caloric expenditure, and the PARS is the rate over the basal metabolic rate for the different activities, and this is for a man in the 1800s and the same person in England, and it shows the intake, and you can see the number of hours and what they did. It shows a tremendous amount of physical activity is required in the 1800s for these individuals, far greater than the amount of physical activity at the present time. Thus, in past generations, there was both a very high caloric intake in response to a very substantial energy expenditure. Similar data has been collected in the United States from populations from around the 1850s. Furthermore, the lowest level of caloric intake in these populations could probably not work and had very high mortality at younger ages. Our energy expenditure is low and has not decreased very much during the obesity epidemic. The obesity epidemic is due in part to very low energy expenditure to compensate for the increasing availability of food. Efforts to increase energy expenditure for the most part are minuscule compared to what we've seen in previous generations. Let's review the details of the obesity epidemic. Most likely that either parents or a single parent at home were working outside of the home. This had a major impact on the obesity epidemic in a genetically susceptible population. The changes in family structure, employment out of the home, had three major impacts. It has resulted in a decrease in the percentage of meals at home due to lack of time for meal preparation. It has positively led to increased family income, which has made it possible to buy greater amounts of snack foods out of the home and fast foods, and increase the market for fast foods. And three, probably reduce both children and adults' access to leisure time activity out of the home. This is the reality of the situation. It is not bad, is not a bad change, but we have to live with this change and modify our preventive programs in relationship to this. Changes in work patterns are well known to everybody, including the percentage of mothers in the labor force with children under 18 and women working long hours, and that's shown here, in these marked here, and then the red changes here. I think you're all familiar with this. This is not unique in the United States, and therefore cannot be the sole explanation of the obesity epidemic. This compares the number of men and women working, the percentage difference between men and women, and you can see here is the United States, but also France, and also in Japan, where again there's big differences. And so this is not the explanation, alone cannot explain the epidemic. Okay. The decline in cigarette smoking and alcohol consumption has played a very important role. There is a fairly substantial increase in body weight following smoking cessation. Certainly we do not want to have another smoking epidemic. Food is our number one social outlet. Let's meet for lunch or come to a dinner party. This is a new phenomenon of the past 20 or 30 years. There was an increase in the consumption of fast foods and snacks, as we noted, and calorically dense food. Kuller, an economist at Harvard, has argued that the increase in snacks are the major determinant of the obesity epidemic based on their analysis of data from the continuing survey of food. The primary increase was from snacks, which I marked here, in both men and women, with little change, they claim, in calories for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. This is the picture from McDonald's, and we're all familiar with this, the epidemic. At this picture, which is very early in the epidemic, the McDonald's hamburgers were 15 cents, and they sold over 1 million. And of course, there's been a much greater sale of this over time. The percentage of the total disposable income for food has dropped dramatically in the United States, but if you look at the bottom kind, as the cost of food has dropped, there's still an increase now in the cost of food out of the home. This is due to better technology, obviously. In 2006, the Americans spent 48% of their food dollars on food prepared outside of the home, in comparison to only 26% in 1970. The larger amount of food consumed away from home is fast food. The ability to manufacture large amounts of cheap, high-caloric fast food, much like the development of the machines to make cigarettes, is a major factor in the obesity epidemic. We are a product of the successes of past generations. The Cardiovascular study very nicely shows this, where the baseline frequency of fast foods and the changes in fast food is strikingly related to the weight gain in the young adults, and points this out very nicely. The outmigration from urban areas and changes in work environment have also had a great effect. For most individuals now, transport to work is by car, truck, or van. Very few walk or bicycle to work, so there's very little energy expenditure going to work. Also, time to and from work has increased for many individuals, which reduces the potential leisure time for physical activity. Our leisure time physical activity is scarce, and therefore is very expensive to the individual. People select their leisure time activities very carefully. Sports and exercise only contribute a very small amount of leisure time physical activity per week. Only 2.2 hours per week, even though this has increased a little bit. Now let's look at the research areas. What are the research recommendations? What should we be doing? What are the most important research questions to decrease the obesity epidemic? First, most people cannot maintain weight loss by diet or continued high levels of exercise. Why? They are gaining weight up to age 50 or 60. We do a poor job of preventing weight gain. Are there specific nutrients independent of caloric intake that would modify eating behavior? We have no decent drugs for the treatment of obesity. The most successful treatment has become bariatric surgery. Why do some people maintain a low body weight and good health in the face of the obesity epidemic? Is this genetic, host susceptibility? A major problem in weight gain and inability to lose weight is the lack of satiety after eating, resulting in further food intake. The changes in body fat and weight loss trigger responses in the brain that lead to hunger and decreased metabolic rate. Weight gain should lead to opposite responses. It's just an example of this, and for many of you, just to show you, but basically there's a complex, this is just a very simplistic model of a complex interrelationship between the brain, the fat stores, the muscle energy expenditure, and what should be happening, and the hormones that should be affecting these results. Unfortunately, the system sounds great, it is not working very well for us. The brain, especially the hypothalamus, determines in part our response to regulation of body fat content. In a perfect system, as we increase our body fat, we should lose the desire to eat, increase our energy expenditure, lose the weight, and maintain energy balance. But as I pointed out, it doesn't work. The system is driven to the positive energy balance or weight gain. It just shows you a little bit of that, which shows that this is the group in the bottom when you gain weight and you start weight loss, and this is normal weight. But if you look, the driving forces here are basically the factors that control weight gain rather than weight loss. And so we're driven primarily in this direction, which is essentially to weight gain. This is a complex physiological system. This is a very simplistic model. But the key point is that there may be a few key players that would make the difference. There are also, and not to memorize this thing, are a variety of hormones that are secreted by the GI tract, which interact to determine insulin secretion and metabolism, and especially in relationship to our eating behavior. Sorry. Clinical trials to evaluate weight loss have generally been unsuccessful in the long term, especially if we use recommended 10% weight loss as a guideline. This slide shows a variety of different studies, and the middle curve shows the average here of weight loss over the 5 years. It's estimated that over 5 years, the average weight loss at the best in these good trials is 3 to 4 kilograms or 6 to 8 pounds. The women's study, which we did in Pittsburgh, was a 48-month trial. Documented lifestyle intervention had a 3.4 kilogram weight loss at 48 months. This was significant, but much smaller than at 6 months, 7.8 kilograms. The percentage of women who lost greater than 10% of their weight dropped from 47% of the women at 6 months to only 21% of the women at 48 months. The interventions were stopped at 30 months. The key determinant of weight loss was how much weight at 48 months is how much weight you lose in the first 6 months. Women who lost less than 10 pounds at 6 months had actually regained weight and were 4 pounds above baseline at 48 months. Changes in eating fish, eating fruits and vegetables, and increasing energy expenditure, not shown on this graph, were some of the key factors associated with maintaining weight loss, or weight regain was associated with eating desserts, increased sugar-sweetened beverages, increasing fried food, and increasing meat and cheese. We do not have data on snacks. These results are similar to other long-term weight loss studies. An important observation is that the interventions were stopped or reduced over time in all of these studies with substantial weight regain. And one key message is that behavioral interventions are like drug therapy for hypertension or elevated lipids. Most likely, they must be continued for the lifetime of the individual. The National Weight Loss Registry is an interesting project developed by Dr. Rena Wing, following a sample of individuals who lost greater than 30 pounds and have maintained weight loss for at least 1 year. Most had lost weight on their own. Similarly, decreases in caloric intake, increases in physical activity, increases in eating breakfast, carefully daily weighing, and reduction in eating out of home are major factors associated with successful long-term weight loss. The key finding, however, is that the participants, even many years after weight loss, must continue to carefully monitor their weight and lifestyles and are even regaining weight after many years of success. The situation is very different when it comes to bariatric surgery, and this is the gastric bypass group here over 10 years. This is from the Swedish obesity study, which is the only pseudo-clinical trial of bariatric surgery. They reported, as you can see, successful weight loss over 10 years following gastric bypass surgery. The surgery, for those of you not familiar with it, is a unique surgery which bypasses part of the stomach and basically the duodenum, and the piece of this is missing up here, and the and the small intestine. We showed years ago that bariatric surgery was associated with a substantial reduction in the prevalence of diabetes from pre-op to post-op, from 65 to 13% in the use of oral diabetic drugs, right here, and from 27 to 6% for insulin use, irrespective of the duration of diabetes. Further studies have shown that the diabetes disappears long before the weight loss, and even without weight loss after the surgery. Just manipulation of the gastrointestinal tract, it results in the disappearance of the diabetes. This is a very important clue to the control of both the obesity epidemic and diabetes. There was a reduction in cardiovascular events in the Swedish obesity study as well, but strikingly, it was unrelated to the weight loss in the trial or to the BMI at the beginning of the trial. Let's look at your genetics a little bit. Why are some individuals able to remain thin while others become very obese? Host susceptibility, familial and genetic studies suggest that 40 to 70% of individual variation in obesity is due to genetic factors. There is a very high correlation of obesity within families. A few rare major genes have been identified that account for a very small number of severe obesity, especially in children. Recent genetic studies have focused on very large populations using genomic-wide association studies of the exome, and more recently total genome sequencing to identify important genetic variations in obesity. These very large studies, including over 100,000 individuals, have identified maybe 8 loci consistently related to obesity. Most genes related to obesity so far have their effects apparently in the central nervous system. Unfortunately, most of the identified genomic markers have very small effects on body weight or on the risk of obesity, with relative risk in the 1.1 to 1.4 range. Speakman has approached the evolving obesity epidemic in genetics somewhat differently. He noted that 2 million years ago, predation was removed as a significant factor for the development of social behavior, weapons, and fire. The absence of predation led to change in the population distribution of body fatness due to random mutations and drift. These random mutations favored the development of obesity because thinner individuals were at higher risk of premature mortality from various infectious diseases, malnutrition, and very thin women did not reproduce. It was also suggested that the population, there were individuals who still have genetic characteristics which lead them to be very low body weight. Over time, there have been multiple mutations in many genes that have gradually shifted the set point. So the set point is gradually moving here from a balance to here, where the set point is pushing toward high BMI, and this has occurred over time, and the set point has been gradually lowered. This is somewhat different than Neal's thrifty gene hypothesis. It is also, humans have very large brains. They are metabolically expensive brains. Human babies are fat, and there's also a greater maternal fatness. Some of this fatness in humans is certainly brown fat, which protects against the cold environment leaving the womb. Human babies at birth have the most fatness, primarily because the head size is fairly small and there's a need for high energy supply early in life in order to normalize, in order for normal brain growth. There is substantial postnatal brain growth. Our large brains may have been the evolutionary pressure for the increased fatness, and it also enabled us to produce an environment we're able to survive, given the fact that there is plenty of food available. There may have been genetic selection against babies that had less fat at birth or smaller brains living in an environment of less food availability. The human cerebral cortex and gray matter have a major influence on our decisions about eating, food choice, exercise, and other behaviors. The frontal lobe especially has an important role in executive functions, complex decision-making, and emotional responses. Damage in utero or early in life during rapid brain growth could have a profound effect on future behaviors. There continues to be a very high prevalence of children born small for gestational age, premature, and who are exposed in utero to early life brain damage that likely contributes to altered eating and exercise behavior and obesity during childhood and adult life. In fact, it is possible that we may have lost the battle even before we've started. This is an interesting study we're doing in population study in Pittsburgh of psychological and behavioral development of children, especially low-income populations. There's a very high prevalence of severe obesity among these young girls. 8.2% of Afro-American girls in our study are severely obese by age 15, with a BMI close to 40, and 3.6% of white girls. This is a very serious problem in a community like Pittsburgh, where we have excellent pediatric services, the efforts of many investigators to modify the obesity epidemic. The girls' caloric imbalance intake versus energy is up to 1,000 calories a day because of their excess weight. Are there important genetic determinants of this rapid severe obesity in children? We don't know. Obesity rates vary dramatically among countries. Of considerable importance for our discussion today is the relatively low rates of obesity in Japan and France. You'll notice that. One of the major differences in the Japanese diet is the very high intake of omega-3 fatty acids from fish, about 1,000 milligrams per day, as compared to 100 milligrams in the United States. Omega-3 fatty acids are the major fatty acids in the brain. There's a very high intake of flavonoids in the Japanese diet and much lower beef consumption, but little differences in physical activity. A second interesting group is the French. The French do not eat a so-called Mediterranean diet. They live too far north. The diet is dominated by high-fat foods, rich sauces, red meat and cheese, and significant amounts of wine, and high intakes of omega-3 fatty acids from vegetable sources, alpha-linoleic acid. The paradox may not be related to what they eat, but how they eat it. They consume most of their foods at meal times, shared with others. They spend a much longer period of time eating their meals, and they rarely snack between meals. There are two eating styles, what we call the stable for the United States, where individuals eat any time of the day, and the zoo for the French, where the individuals eat only at specific feeding times. Maybe the United States has to go on a zoo program. The difference between the French and the Americans are illustrated by asking the phrase, eat well. What does it mean? For Americans, it's for the health, and for the French, it's for pleasure. The third group is vegetarians. And again, vegetarians, especially down here, pure vegetarians and vegans, have extremely low BMI. This has generated interest about whether beef consumption could perhaps be a contributor to the obesity epidemic. Beef consumption increased dramatically after World War II, but since then it has been relatively flat or even decreasing. Therefore, it is unlikely that increase in beef consumption is the cause of the obesity epidemic. However, the United States, compared with Japan and many other countries, has extremely high intake of beef, well above what has been recommended in the United States. Thus, the high levels of beef consumption in the United States may in part contribute to the obesity epidemic. Further, an interesting phenomenon is the consumption of bottled water in the United States. Since 1980, we have dramatically increased the consumption of bottled water and substantially increased the consumption of high-caloric carbonated soft drinks, contributing over 200 calories per day in the United States food supply. We have convinced the public that drinking water out of a tap is dangerous to your health. This is a little bit complex, so I'll just point it out that we consume about 465 calories per day from fluids in the United States diet. Most of it is from sweetened beverages. Furthermore, we have switched the sugars from primarily sucrose to high fructose corn syrup, about 70% fructose. Differences in metabolism between fructose and glucose are still a lively debate. Fructose is almost completely metabolized in the liver as an important source of fatty acid synthesis in the liver and may contribute to increased hepatic fat or steatosis and insulin resistance. Similarly, changes in our diet have affected the gut bacteria. In mice, it is possible to vary the risk of obesity in relationship to the bacterial flora. In farm animals, the introduction of antibiotics or probiotics into the food chain may have had a profound and unrecognized effect on our gut bacteria and obesity epidemic. This is a very new and important area. Because of time, I'm going to sail along a little bit here. I just want to show you what I think is other. I'm just going to skip a couple of slides because of time, so I want to move ahead. Okay, one of the interesting areas I think to look at is, and I didn't have the time to show this in detail, is what we call ectopic fat accumulation. Fat accumulates in other tissues than fat depots with increasing obesity, and this leads to insulin resistance, diabetes, and inability to lose weight. The excess fat triglycerides can be stored in both skeletal and cardiac muscle. The amount of fat in muscle increases with age and obesity in both men and women. There are two fat depots in skeletal muscle, fat in between the muscles and fat within the fascia of the skeletal muscles. The amount of intermuscular fat increases with obesity. There is a positive association between intramuscular fat and type 2 diabetes. And what does this mean? It's possible that what's happening here is that as we store the fat in our muscle, and especially intramuscular fat, this may have an effect on mitochondrial oxidation and APD production, and ultimately lead back to a fact of muscle inefficiency in using energy, increased demand for calories, and weight regain. This may be another clue to what's happening. Now, very quickly, because we only have a few moments, what are the options now for the prevention of obesity? First of all, the stigmatization of we should end the stigmatization of obesity. This should be stopped, especially for children. Eating is an important social behavior, not a therapeutic trial. People are obese not because they want to be, but because they have the interaction of the agents, the diet, the exercise, the environment, and their genetic susceptibility. Second, prevention of weight gain in children and young adults should clearly have the highest priority. This requires a total approach, not piecemeal. Changes in school nutrition, building grocery stores, or poorly designed physical activity programs. We need the same successful approaches that reduced malnutrition and childhood infectious diseases in the past. Very good public health and preventive medicine with documented objective outcomes, carefully controlled and evaluated over time with hard endpoints. Prevention programs must be for the whole population and not singling out fat kids. Third, eating behavior is noted as, and especially snack foods, grazing has become our most important role and we should focus on this area. Regular food consumption, especially breakfast, dinner, and eating meals at home are probably critical. Fourth, we need to increase consumption of tap water, especially for children, and the quality of the water supply and distribution systems. This needs to be a national effort to use tap water as a replacement for bottled drinks and especially for high-caloric drinks. And again, because of times, I'm going to skip a little of this. Fifth, we need to improve and modify the physical activity programs for children and adults so that they have social utility, are interesting, and are consistent with the capabilities. We should be upgrading the facilities and improving accessibilities. Walking paths and availability of parks alone is not the solution. In New York City, in the 1950s, teachers' guides were provided for physical activity from kindergarten through high school graduation. A book by the Board of Education on physical activity for elementary school students in 1958 stated that the education in young people, we realize more and more the value of physical activity in the school curriculum. The program was integrated in the school curriculum. The primary purpose was not health or obesity prevention, but rather the belief that to be successful in life, a student must develop skills and enjoyment of physical activities. These skills were linked to the abilities and interests of the students to try and ensure a continuation over time. Unfortunately, this elitist approach was lost in the numerous political and social changes in education. The obesity epidemic is a common source epidemic, and therefore it is important with industry to deal with this common source epidemic. This must be done not in a pejorative way, but as an active collaborative approach, similar to what was done in efforts to reduce the amount of cholesterol and saturated fat in the diet, leading to the substantial decrease in blood cholesterol levels and decline in coronary heart disease. There needs a major effort to develop foods that will decrease the appetite and increase satiety. A substantial increase in omega-3s in the diet, perhaps, maybe to 1 gram a day as in Japan, without use of pills. There needs to be a good trial or test of whether fructose in the diet is really hazardous. We also need to test whether plant-based diets will change eating behaviors in the long term. A major effort must lead to increase the palatability. Finally, and very briefly, what doesn't work? Individual, you can see some of these right here. Finally, what doesn't work? Many of the current activities that have been successful and yet continue to be utilized have never been scientifically evaluated prior to widespread dissemination, including diet weight loss programs, have minimal long-term effects in maintaining weight loss, 10% or even 5%. Commercial weight loss programs work just as well. We should be focusing only on well-designed long-term weight loss trials with testable hypotheses. There has to be commitment to long-term studies, or we shouldn't be doing them at all. Nutrition education and putting calories on the menus has very small or limited effects. Furthermore, dietary intervention alone in obese individuals will not reduce cardiovascular risk factors or diabetes enough, except in the short term. And we have very effective medical therapies. We should end the process of restricting jobs or changing increased insurance for obese people. This is wrong and doesn't help. We will not help reduce the obesity epidemic. Notifying parents that the children of obese are only worse that the parents haven't seen the children for 3 years. Finally, and most important, and I'll stop here, is that doing good and trying to reduce the obesity epidemic without any evidence that the program or programs will have any real positive benefits is not good. We have clearly demanded well-documented clinical trials and effectiveness studies before we implement large public health programs, which in the end are costly and have little effects. Simplistic approaches like trying to raise the price of sugary drinks to wipe out the obesity epidemic are a mistake and counterproductive. And lastly, it is time to end the multiple committees and numerous recommendations yearly from different organizations on how to reduce the obesity epidemic. Rather, we should depend on good scientific investigation translated into effective clinical and public health programs. Thank you.
We have time for some questions, so please, if you have a question, use the microphone so that those listening to the video cast can hear the questions. Yes, please.
Excuse me. Have you done any studies about the role of artificial sweeteners that people take by the ton?
Artificial sweeteners in relationship to the obesity epidemic?
Obesity, or is it, do they help? Do they provide satiety?
Well, it's the same problem. They're a little piece of a big problem, and they're not going to solve the problem all by themselves. So just saying that we have artificial sweeteners will wipe out the problem. It was like the era a few years ago where we basically tried to have all the foods labeled low fat, but basically had the same number of calories. It didn't do any good.
So I have a comment in that we only have one drug currently available for obesity, that's orlistat. And yet we talk about obesity and we're very upset that we only get a few kilo weight loss. So with orlistat, there's a Zendos trial with 4-year follow-up with only 2.5 kilos of weight loss difference. There was a 1/3 reduction in the incidence of diabetes. So I want your, just it's as a comment and want your opinion on what is the goal of treating obesity. It's not cosmesis. I would hope you'd agree. Presumably it's better health, and yet here we have a concrete example with a 4-year follow-up, which is pretty good, that only 2.5 kilos reduction is a benefit.
Yeah. I have 2 comments about that, and I want to be pejorative about it. But one, if you look at the DPP results, the diabetes prevention trial out over 10 years, you see what's happening, that basically there's very little change in diabetes after the first part of the study. But basically what happens is if you start out with people in a study where if the definition of diabetes is a blood glucose of 126, and you start out with people with blood glucoses of 122, it doesn't take much to basically get it up to 126. I just wrote a paper where I basically think that we should abandon this idea of a strict label of diabetes at some blood sugar level, but treat it like cholesterol as a continuous variable. And I think the question is how much blood glucose does it lower, and how much does that blood glucose lower the risk of coronary disease, stroke, and things. There's no evidence at all that I can find, solid evidence, that we have clinical trials that suggest that little bit of weight loss is going to have an effect on any major cardiovascular or cancer outcome. If it did, it would be amazing, but I doubt it very much.
But the trial size would have to be huge.
Well, thank you for covering all the issues. Looks like epidemiology here is not working. I mean, we could see what are the outcomes for some of these studies, but there is no way to control the behavior to keep the food away from the mouth. So, so it is a neurobehavioral system, I guess. We need a different approach. Any idea you might come up with?
Well, I think you're right. I think we have to basically look at this as a neurobehavioral problem, given the fact that we're not going to go back to a lifestyle of the distant past or start chopping down trees to prevent obesity. And I think right now we have to try and work on improving the diet in relationship to increasing satiety and decreasing appetite after eating foods. But also I think ultimately, unfortunately, and this is sort of a bad thing to say, but unfortunately I think we ultimately need some drugs that work.
Thank you.
Hi, I read it.
Do you think that changes in agricultural subsidies could play a role in decreasing obesity? I'm thinking of decreasing subsidies for soybean and corn, and maybe increases for vegetables and fruit.
We've talked about that for umpteen years in terms of when it was related to cholesterol levels and trying to lower blood cholesterols and things like that. It sounds very good, but unfortunately in our society it doesn't work very well. So it sounds good, but it's extraordinarily difficult to implement especially at the population level. And the other thing we have to remember is that all of these epidemics move downward in the socioeconomic strain, and it's that group that's the hardest to reach with many of these changes, so that it would be nice to change food production in a positive way. I think the idea is to get rid of snack foods and get people to stop snacking would probably have the biggest effect. But how do you do that? It's great to say that, but it's easier said than done. A lot of my friends write great papers about this, but they never show me on paper that they've ever accomplished anything. They just tell me it's an important problem.
What about the environmental pollutants posed by plastic? They don't really know why, but they think that there are some kind of estrogens that are being exuded by plastics, and also the hormonal ingestion of food that's been given all these antibiotics and hormones in this country. It's very hard to believe that this doesn't have an influence.
It's
and
possible.
The environmental
It's possible, but you have to remember that the obesity epidemic has happened not only in the United States, but in Australia, Great Britain, Canada, many countries in Europe, many countries around the world. So whatever you link to the obesity epidemic in totality, you have to then test it whether the same phenomenon exists in these other countries. And in most cases, they don't. The one commonality in most of these things has been the introduction of new technologies for food processing and the availability of food at a reduced cost and the changes in family structure. So I think the technology and the changes in the social environment are probably overwhelming many of these other factors, which could also be important.
Well, with the oceans also, the toxins.
Thank you so much for a wonderful talk. I just have a couple questions. The first one is, what do we do with the low-income or underprivileged populations that are really the ones that are suffering possibly the most from this, because they cannot afford to have fruits and vegetables and healthy foods. They also are facing other types of challenges. They don't necessarily have the best access to health care. What exactly can work in these particular populations?
It's a good question, and I try to get that at the end. I really think we need to go back to some of the traditional public health approaches. When I first started, the public health department, for example, in Pittsburgh, had about 400 public health nurses, and they made absolutely certain that every kid got immunized. They made that every child got adequate nutrition, adequate follow-up, and adequate care. It doesn't exist anymore. We've given that up, and I think, unfortunately, we may have to go back to such a system. You don't just to be nurses, but public health workers or things like that. We've institutionalized it in our medical centers, and the problem is out in the community, and you hit it on the head.
And the second thing is, sorry, but what about the addiction dimension of things? So a lot of people, I mean, as has already been mentioned, as a neurobehavioral system, it's a habit of eating, but also, I guess the fact of eating or consuming high sugar content foods and beverages is addictive. So.
Yeah, and again, I think that's important, but if you look at the totality of the epidemic in different countries and around the world, you've got to focus on the commonality of the factors, and that's probably an important factor, though, as well.
Yes. When I go to the grocery store, how do you feel about unavailability of anything other than processed foods? Does that have any effect on weight gain?
Oh, it sure does. I mean, the foods are processed and they're high caloric, and a major effect. And as the government, the government's trying to push the idea of eating more fruits and vegetables and low caloric foods, but it's a major challenge.
I was wondering if I could get your comment on a calculation that we published a couple years ago regarding the food supply and food waste trends that have occurred in the U.S. since the 70s. And one of the things that we noticed was that food waste on a per capita basis has gone up by about 500 calories per day in the U.S. That's about a 50% increase since the 1970s, whereas food intake, actual consumption that's driving the obesity epidemic, has only gone up by about 200 to 300 calories per day. So our interpretation was that we're basically pushing the calories into the food system. We actually only eat a little bit of it, and more of that excess went in the trash.
Yeah, that's probably true with my lunch today, so you're probably correct. So I think that's very true, and I think that's true because of the fact that we eat fast foods, and we don't sit down. The traditional approach is 3 meals a day, but eating all day long, eating a little bit here and there and throwing it away and starting on something else.
Two more questions.
You mentioned earlier in your talk how there is a strong association between children that are obese and parents that are obese, and you mentioned that it's an interplay of genetic and environmental factors. And then later in your talk, you had said that nutrition education isn't effective and that raising the awareness of parents isn't effective. And so I was just wondering if you could comment about how you would suggest that we approach the prevalence of obesity in kids and young children that are already obese.
I hope I didn't say that. What I said is it's not a good idea to sound out or saddle out only the fat kids as part of your nutrition education. Nutrition education should be for everybody and should aim to the entire population. It doesn't do good, I don't think, to just send a note home to the mother and say, you have a fat kid. I mean, the mother obviously knows that. The mother may be obese as well. You haven't accomplished anything, as opposed to nutritional education for everybody, and which I think would have a much bigger effect.
Okay, just to follow up on that, there's been a lot of studies recently that have shown that parents are often not aware that their child is obese. So do you think that there's any value in raising the awareness in order to prevent obesity among children?
I would be surprised if the parents don't realize the child is obese, sending them a note home saying your child is obese. I would be very surprised if it had any really dramatic effect. I could be wrong, but there's no evidence to support that. There's no evidence from those studies that it has any real effect. You could test that in a good study and find out what happens, but right now I think it's mostly hearsay, and I think we need solid scientific evidence that these things work.
Thanks.
So last question here, and I apologize because we're past the hour, but I'm sure our speaker will stay down in front if you want to come and ask other questions. I'm just sensitive to the timetable.
Thank you, Lou.
Yes, sir.
Quick question. I remember back in Pittsburgh, you always promoted that if one could institute policy change, that was going to be the best way to get actually, something to be put into place. So prevent car accidents. I remember you saying reduce the speed limit to 55 and you're going to save lives. And in fact, you do. If you have a controlled environment where you've got kids, and I'm specifically talking about the school situation, would you recommend, or what would you recommend the greatest effect for an intervention? Would it be focused on trying to improve physical activity, getting a hold of the menu and the nutrition environment in schools? If you could only really change one item, or one item at a time.
I try to put you to the point. My own feeling would be on physical activity, and I would say that go get the 1958 edition of the New York City Board of Health program for education of physical activity for the school kids. It's fantastic. I almost tempted to put a new cover on it. I thought a foundation would give me huge amounts of money, but then I felt I'd be in big trouble later on. But it's a fantastic document. It lays out the physical activity program beginning in kindergarten and going all the way through high school, literally, and in detail, nothing to do with obesity or health, but just to do with the social desirability of physical activity and different types of activity. So it's not walking around the block or climbing it, and goes all the way to teaching kids how to play golf, tennis, swimming, you name it. And it's oriented, I think, beautifully, and that's what we need in the school system. I think that would be the #1 priority.
All right, thank you.
Let us thank our speaker again.
Thank you. Thank you.